I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, and quietly carried enough weight, the company would eventually recognize my value. But I learned that when you are the person keeping an entire system from collapsing, people do not always call it leadership. Sometimes, they call it duty. And when I was denied a promotion and told I was not ready for senior management, I finally understood something. Some systems only wake up when the invisible pillar holding them together stops carrying the load. The sky that day was heavy and gray, as if the whole city were holding back a long sigh. I sat across from Margaret Pierce in her spotless office. Watching her perfectly manicured hands turn the pages of the promotion portfolio I had spent weeks preparing. Inside that file were years of sacrificed weekends, countless family dinners I had missed, nights when I stayed in the office after the entire floor had gone dark, and strategies I had written quietly so someone else could stand in front of executives and receive applause. All of it had been condensed into a thick document, yet Margaret looked at it the way someone looks at a routine item on a checklist before lunch. She told me she appreciated my enthusiasm. Her voice was soft, polite, professional, and distant enough that I could almost hear the door closing in front of me. Then she said that after careful review, she believed my work had been suitable, but I was not ready for senior management. The word suitable landed between us like a stone. I had maintained the highest client satisfaction scores in the department. I had saved the Whitmore account when everyone else had practically given up on it. I had not taken a full weekend for myself in years. But instead of saying any of that, I smiled. I nodded. Using the calm expression I had perfected in corporate life, I said I understood and thanked her for the feedback. Margaret seemed relieved that I did not argue. She glanced at her watch and immediately moved on to the Harrington Global proposal that needed additional metrics that day. When I stood to gather my things, she had already returned to her email. The greatest professional disappointment of my career had been filed away like a minor administrative note. I left Margaret's office and walked past the corner room that could have been mine. The glass door, the city view, the empty strip of wall where a new nameplate could have gone. For one brief moment, I imagined my name there, Natalie Mercer. Not because I needed a beautiful office, but because after everything I had done, I thought I deserved a place that acknowledged me properly. But in that same moment, I understood something else. In their eyes, I was not leadership. I was the person who fixed problems, prepared documents, remembered every workflow, and stayed late so that by morning, every crisis looked as though it had never happened. I went down to the parking garage and sat in my car without starting the engine. In the rearview mirror, my face looked strangely calm. I had expected tears. I had expected anger sharp enough to make my hands shake. But the woman looking back at me did not look defeated. She looked like someone who had finally identified the weakness in the entire system. I did not want to scream. I did not want to storm into human resources and complain. I had already done that too many times in my own head. During all the years, I convinced myself that one more project, one more client rescue, one more excellent report would finally make them see me. But they had not seen me, because I had made it too easy for them not to. I started the car and made two decisions. First, I would cancel my upcoming vacation. Second, I would stop writing the daily operational guides that no one had formally asked for. Yet everyone depended on. If the company believed I was merely suitable, then starting the next day, I would work exactly within the limits of the role they claimed suited me. That evening, I opened my personal laptop and canceled the small cabin reservation I had planned for Sophie and me. The first real break we would have had in far too long. I watched the cancellation confirmation appear on the screen, and I did not feel the kind of regret I expected. Part of me hurt because once again, work had forced its way into the life my daughter and I were supposed to share. But this time was different. I was not canceling a vacation to save the company. I was canceling it so I could be present when the company finally discovered what happened without the labor it had never valued properly. I also opened the folder that held my daily operational guides. For years, every morning, I had prepared briefing notes for Margaret before her management meeting. I summarized every client, every contract risk, every project bottleneck, and even the answers she might need if executives asked deeper questions. Every evening, I sent detailed updates to the team, complete enough for everyone to believe they still had control. No one officially asked me to do it, but whenever I did not, people became confused. So I continued. I turned my initiative into a crutch for the whole department. That night, I wrote nothing. I sat in front of the blank screen, feeling as though I had put down something heavy that I had carried for far too long. I wondered why women in the workplace are so often praised for being thoughtful, loyal, and prepared, only to have those same qualities used to keep them behind others. If my story reminds you of a time when you were underestimated, even though you were the one keeping everything from falling apart, comment number 1, so I know you have been there too. The next morning, I would not arrive early. I would not prepare for anyone else. And I would no longer be invisible. My name is Natalie Mercer. Before that day, if you had asked anyone at Ashford Solutions who the most reliable person in the department was, they probably would not have said my name first. They would have named the person who spoke most often in meetings, the person who appeared in executive briefings, the person with a voice confident enough to turn someone else's work into their own achievement. But if you asked who knew where the backup passwords were kept, which client needed a call before they became angry, or which workflow could break because of one missing data file, eventually every finger would point toward me. I have always been systematic by nature. Growing up with 4 younger siblings taught me how to spot problems before they became disasters. I knew which child was about to get sick before my mother noticed. I knew which bill was close to being late. I knew what kind of silence in the house meant an argument was coming. That skill followed me into professional life, where it became both the thing that made me valuable and the thing that trapped me. When I joined Ashford Solutions years earlier, my department looked like a room after a storm. The previous team lead had left abruptly after a conflict with management, taking nearly all procedural knowledge with them. There were no transition notes, no process documentation, and even some critical systems that no one knew how to access properly. Clients were losing patience. Colleagues were confused. And Margaret, who had recently taken on the management role, clearly had no intention of climbing into the wreckage herself. I climbed in. For the first 3 months, I stayed late, reconstructing workflows, decoding spreadsheets, tracing client histories, and searching through old emails. I created documentation, indexes, color-coded files, risk notes, and a structure strong enough for everyone else to stand on. The problem was that once the system ran smoothly, they forgot who had built it. The morning after the failed promotion meeting, I arrived at the office exactly at 9, not at 7:30. As usual, not at 8:45 to prepare just a little. Exactly at 9. The way my employment contract stated. Walking through the door at the same time, other people considered normal, felt almost rebellious for me. The reception desk was lit. The coffee machine was running. And everything looked the same as always. I was the only thing that had changed. I sat at my desk, opened my inbox, and answered only the emails addressed directly to me. The long email chains where people copied me in, hoping I would automatically step in and solve the problem, remained untouched. The messages phrased as questions, but really asking me to rescue a situation, received answers limited to my actual responsibilities. When a supplier issue surfaced, I forwarded it to procurement, where it should have gone in the first place. Close to lunch, Daniel from accounting appeared beside my desk with a confused expression. He asked whether I had seen the email thread about the scheduling conflict on the Whitmore account. I said yes. He waited for me to continue, the way I always had before, when I would sigh. Open the schedule. Call 3 different parties. Adjust the timeline. And send a clean solution before anyone could fully panic. But this time, I turned back to my screen and continued my own work. Daniel asked if I could handle it the way I usually did. I smiled and told him it belonged to procurement, and I had already forwarded it to Rebecca. If you have ever found yourself doing far more than you were paid to do simply because no one else would take responsibility, please like this video. Not because I want you to be angry, but because I want you to remember that dedication should never become an excuse for others to exploit you. My answer made Daniel freeze. He frowned, not exactly offended, but like someone who had just realized the elevator he used every day did not run by magic. He said I had always handled those kinds of things before. I looked at him and kept my voice as gentle as possible. I told him I was trying to focus on the responsibilities actually assigned to me, because I had recently been reminded that I needed to understand my proper place in the organization. I did not need to say Margaret's name. Daniel understood. The rest of that day unfolded like a strange social experiment. People who normally walked past my desk without greeting me suddenly stopped. One person asked about a file, another asked about a process. Someone else wanted to know why Margaret did not have her morning briefing notes. I answered each question politely, but I did not carry anything outside my role. At times, I felt guilty. That feeling is familiar to women who are used to managing both the work and the emotional comfort of everyone around them. The moment we stop holding others up, we are made to feel responsible for the fall. But the truth was, I had not caused anyone to fall. I had simply stopped standing underneath them. At exactly 5 p.m, I packed my bag, shut down my computer, and left. I did not check one final email. I did not send one extra update just in case. I did not take my laptop home while pretending I would only open it for 10 minutes. As the elevator doors closed, I saw my reflection in the dull metal. I did not look like the woman in the parking garage the day before. I had not won anything yet, but I had begun taking back control of my own time. That evening, my work phone vibrated continuously on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up, went dark, then lit up again, like a neglected child trying to be noticed. I looked at it for a moment, then turned it face down. Sophie stood beside me with her sleeves rolled up, flour on her cheeks as we mixed chocolate chip cookie dough. I had promised to bake with her for a long time, but there had always been a call, a report, a proposal, or some urgent problem that came first. That night, for the first time in months, nothing was allowed to come between us. Sophie asked why I was home early. Her question stopped me. A child should not have to experience her mother coming home on time as a special occasion. I wanted to tell her that I had been denied a promotion. I wanted to tell her that I had realized my company was eroding my life. But she was still a child, and I did not want to hand her bitterness too early. So I simply told her that I had realized my time was valuable, and I wanted to spend more of it with her. Sophie smiled so brightly it made my chest ache. She asked whether we could do something together again the next day. I told her absolutely. As I said the word, I felt a small pain inside me because I realized how many times I had told her another day. Work had trained me to respond to client needs within minutes. Yet it had made me late for my own daughter. The phone kept vibrating. I did not answer it. That evening, we baked crooked cookies, laughed at the ones with burned edges, and I felt a kind of peace I had not allowed myself to ask for in years. The next morning, the cracks became visible. Harrington Global, a major client worth millions in annual revenue, requested urgent changes to its implementation plan. These were not simple edits in a spreadsheet. Their system involved special customizations, complicated technical dependencies, and a chain of commitments I had followed from the very beginning. I understood it because I had built that relationship from nothing. Stayed late for meetings in their overseas time zone, studied their industry, and remembered concerns they had not even written into formal requirements yet. Margaret did not understand it. She had attended a few Harrington Global meetings, mostly when it was useful to appear before executives. She knew how to speak about strategy, but she did not know the operational skeleton underneath it. Around mid-morning, she appeared at my desk and asked where the process notes for the Harrington customizations were. I told her they were in the shared drive, under client implementations, exactly where I had mentioned in the department meeting the previous month. She opened the folder, looked at hundreds of files, and her face tightened. She asked which file specifically. I showed her the master document, a long guide organized by module, with an index, tabs, and risk notes. It was the kind of documentation that anyone who had ever been genuinely interested in my work would have known existed. Margaret stared at it as if it were a wall too high to climb. Then she asked whether I could simply handle the issue directly. I said I could. But I had the quarterly compliance report that afternoon, and it had to be submitted to regulators by the deadline. If you want more stories about reclaiming your position at work without losing your composure, subscribe to the channel now. Sometimes the most powerful lesson is not in fighting loudly, but in allowing the truth to reveal itself. Margaret did not answer right away. She looked at me as if I had said something unreasonable, when in reality I had only repeated the schedule of work that had already been assigned. The compliance report could not simply be pushed to the next day. The Harrington issue could not wait long either. For years, the solution had always been for me to stretch my workday until it could hold both. I would write the report during lunch, handle the client in the afternoon, then stay late into the night to finish whatever remained. The next morning, Margaret would walk into a meeting and say, "My team handled it very well." But that day, I did not offer to stay late. I did not say, "Let me see what I can do." I simply asked whether she wanted me to reschedule the compliance work, while reminding her that it was due by the end of the day. Margaret left without making a decision, her heels striking the hallway floor harder than necessary. I watched her go, and I did not feel the satisfaction I thought I might. Instead, I felt something clearer for the first time. She had to feel the weight of choices I had always quietly carried for her. That evening, I turned off all work notifications and took Sophie to the park. She sat on the swings, her hair flying in the wind, her laughter carrying across the playground. I sat on a bench, my personal phone silent beside me. And for the first time in years, my mind was not split between my daughter and an office crisis. When we got home, I checked my work phone once. 79 missed calls. Voicemails ranging from confused to furious. Harrington was threatening to leave. 3 systems had developed issues. The compliance report was still incomplete. I set the phone down and slept more deeply than I had in years. The next morning, I arrived again at exactly 9. The atmosphere in the office had completely changed. The hallway, usually calm, was filled with hurried footsteps. People rushed from one room to another, clutching laptops, their faces tight with stress. Through the glass wall, I could see Margaret on a video call, gesturing rapidly, trying to maintain control even as it clearly slipped away from her. Victor Hayes' assistant stood near the elevators, checking her phone again and again. I put my bag down, opened my computer, and organized my tasks for the day as I always did. Daniel almost rushed to my desk. He asked where I had been, because Margaret had been trying to reach me since the previous afternoon. I told him I had left at 5. In accordance with the working hours in my contract, he looked at me as though the answer was both reasonable and impossible to accept. Then he mentioned the Harrington crisis, his voice dropping almost to a whisper. I asked what specifically had happened. He said they were threatening to walk away, and no one could figure out how to implement the changes they needed. I nodded and said that process required special handling, which I had documented in the guide I created the previous year. Daniel nearly blurted out that no one could understand my documentation without me explaining it. The statement should have embarrassed him. But in that moment, he was too panicked to notice. Before I could respond, Margaret's assistant appeared and told me there was an emergency meeting. I picked up a notebook and pen, then walked at a normal pace. Inside the conference room, Margaret sat beside Victor. Folders spread across the table. Victor's expression showed open relief when he saw me. He said they needed my help with the Harrington situation. I sat down, opened my notebook, and calmly asked how I could assist. Margaret no longer had the patience for polite language. She looked at me, her voice low and hard, and asked what it would take for me to fix the situation. Then she said the promotion was mine. Only a day earlier. I had not been ready. Now, in the middle of a crisis that no one else could solve, I had suddenly become qualified. I tilted my head and looked at her, without showing too much emotion. There are moments in life when you want to laugh. Not because something is funny, but because the irony is too obvious. I told her the offer was generous, but I had been contacted by a competitor. They had offered me a senior management position with a substantial salary increase. Apparently, there was a company that believed I was qualified. The room went silent immediately. Victor's eyes widened, while Margaret narrowed hers as if I had betrayed her. Even though she was the one who had closed the door in my face first, Victor asked whether I was leaving and when. I said I had not accepted their offer yet because I was considering my options. He immediately told me to name my number, and the company would match it. I smiled. But inside, the problem was clear. It was not just about money. If it had been only about money, I would have asked for it long before. What I needed was real recognition. Respect that did not appear only when the system was on fire. And an opportunity to use the strategies I had built instead of forever standing behind someone else's vision. Margaret interrupted and said the Harrington client had asked for me by name. I replied that several other clients had done the same in the past month. Then I took an envelope from my bag and placed it on the table. It was my 2 weeks' notice. Margaret reached for the envelope. But Victor was faster. He opened it, scanned the contents, then closed it, with an expression that had completely changed. He said this would not be necessary, and asked to speak with me privately in his office. As I stood to follow him, Margaret remained seated, both hands clenched against the polished table. I did not look back for long, not because I did not care, but because for the first time in years, the emotional center of the room was no longer Margaret. Victor's office sat in the corner of the upper floor. Minimalist but unmistakably powerful. One wall held industry awards, while the other opened into a wide glass view of the city. He asked me to sit, then said he had been watching my contributions for some time. Though apparently not closely enough, I did not answer. In important negotiations, silence can sometimes force people to hear what they have just said. Victor admitted that the situation with Margaret concerned him. He said this was the first he had heard that my promotion had been denied, and asked why I had not come directly to him. I answered, simply chain of command. Margaret was my direct supervisor, and going around her would have been considered inappropriate. Victor nodded and said that respect for process was admirable, though perhaps misplaced in this case. Then he asked honestly what it would take to keep me. I chose my words carefully. I said I needed the company to recognize my actual contributions, compensate me appropriately, and give me a position with authority to design and implement operational strategy instead of merely patching broken systems. Victor listened longer than Margaret had ever listened to me in any performance review. Victor leaned back, thought for a moment, and said he would create a new position, Director of Operational Systems, reporting directly to him. The salary would be double my current pay. I would have remote flexibility 3 days a week. I would have authority to design cross-department workflows and intervene in operational structures where necessary. He said the role was mine if I wanted it. The offer should have made me accept immediately. Months earlier, I might have cried knowing that I had finally been seen. But after everything that had happened, I was no longer the woman who felt grateful simply to be invited into the room. I did not answer right away, and that surprised Victor. He asked whether the offer was not sufficient. I said it was generous, but I needed to be clear that I was not using the competitor's offer as fake leverage. The other company was truly waiting for my decision. Victor asked what they could offer that Ashford Solutions could not match or exceed. I answered a fresh start. That was the plainest truth. A new place meant no history of being overlooked, no colleagues who called me when work needed rescuing, but forgot to include me in strategic meetings. No manager who had declared me unqualified because she needed me to remain in a support role. Victor did not deny it. He only said that here, I had built systems I understood deeply, clients who trusted me, and a foundation that would allow me to create change faster. Starting elsewhere would mean rebuilding from the ground up. He was right. But being right did not make the decision easy. I told him I needed time to think. Victor gave me the weekend, but asked me to stabilize the Harrington situation before making my final decision. I agreed. When I returned to my desk, Victor's email was already in my inbox. The offer was written clearly, not merely spoken in the panic of a crisis. I read the salary figure twice. The number was not only far above my current income, it was cold proof that the company had always been capable of paying my value. They simply had not felt the need to do so while I quietly accepted less. I prepared the materials for the Harrington Global call. Their team entered the meeting tense, but their voices softened noticeably when they saw me. That made me proud, but also sad. An outside client had recognized my value faster than my own company. They explained their request customizations that would normally take weeks now needed to be implemented within days, or their expansion timeline would be affected. I did not make careless promises to calm them down. I separated their needs into priority levels, identified what had to be completed immediately, what could be phased in, and what required risk approval. The director from Harrington said that this was exactly why they had chosen to work with us, because I understood their business needs, not just technical specifications. I wrote that sentence down, not to boast, but to remember that recognition sometimes comes from places not clouded by internal politics. After the call, I drafted clear implementation instructions and sent them to the execution team. Unlike before, I did not take on everything myself. I assigned each section, set review points, and stated exactly when they should come to me with questions. That was real leadership, not doing everyone's work, but making the system function better without depending on one exhausted person. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, I knocked on Margaret's door. She looked different from usual. The carefully controlled face was still there, but the shadows under her eyes and the stiffness in her shoulders told me she had barely slept. She told me to close the door and sit. A silence passed between us, thick enough that I could hear the air conditioning overhead. Margaret said she knew Victor had offered me the new position. She did not pretend to be happy. And strangely, I respected that more than a fake congratulation. She said she understood why he had done it. Because I was valuable to the company. I waited. Instinct told me there was something more difficult sitting behind that opening sentence. Finally, she said she owed me an apology. Each word seemed difficult for her to push out. She admitted that she had relied on my competence without recognizing or rewarding it properly. I looked at her for a moment and asked what I truly wanted to know when she said I was not qualified for senior management. What specifically did she believe I lacked? Margaret shifted in her chair. She said I was more technical, more of a behind-the-scenes problem solver. Senior management, in her view, required visibility, political skill, and executive presence. I listened and felt years of my work being reduced to an old bias. I asked whether, in other words, I did the work so others could stand in the spotlight. She said I was oversimplifying. I did not think so. I reminded her of the strategy that won the Harrington contract, the client retention initiative that saved major accounts, and the documents others had presented but I had created. I told her I did not lack leadership qualities. I had simply allowed others to stand on my shoulders for too long. Margaret was silent. For the first time in a long while, she had no polished answer. I did not say those things to humiliate her. I did not raise my voice or sharpen my tone. My calmness made the room heavier. Some truths become harder to deny when they are spoken without anger. She asked whether I was going to accept Victor's offer. I said I had not decided. She looked down at her desk and said that if I stayed, things between us would be different. I answered that yes, they would. The weekend arrived like a necessary pause. On Saturday, I took Sophie to the Science Museum, something I had promised her many times and postponed just as often. She ran from exhibit to exhibit, her eyes lighting up at the planet models and light experiments. I walked behind her, happy and aching at the same time. How many moments like this had I missed just to prepare materials that allowed someone else to shine? On Sunday, I called my sister. I told her the whole story. From Margaret's rejection to Victor's offer, and the invitation from the competitor. She asked what my gut was telling me. I said I had outgrown the box they had put me in. But I did not know whether the new offer was a real door or just a larger, softer box. She asked whether I would still report to Margaret. I said no, directly to Victor. Then she asked what would happen to Margaret. That question made me quiet. Victor had not said directly, but I understood that Margaret's position would be reconsidered. My sister said my choice was not only between staying and leaving, it was also between a fresh start and a promotion that might be viewed as retaliation. I realized I needed to be certain my decision was not driven by the desire to see Margaret brought down. I had to be more honest with myself than I wanted to be. Part of me, the exhausted and wounded part, did want to see Margaret face consequences. I wanted her to understand what it felt like to be underestimated. I wanted her to admit that she had stood steady for years, because I had quietly held everything up behind her. But when that feeling settled, I realized it was not what I truly wanted to build. If my first act of leadership was removing someone, the story could be twisted into personal revenge. More importantly, it would not fix the company's real disease. On Monday morning, I arrived at the office at 7:30, my old starting time. This time, I was not there to prepare notes for Margaret. I came early because I had made my decision and wanted to speak to Victor before the day pulled everyone into meetings. His assistant had not arrived yet, but his door was open. Victor looked up, slightly surprised to see me. I told him I would accept his offer, with 2 conditions. He raised his eyebrows and told me to continue. The first condition was that I wanted to build my own team, with full hiring authority for 3 positions I believed were essential. Victor nodded immediately and said that was reasonable. The second condition was that Margaret remained in her current position. This time, he was truly surprised. He asked why. After the way she had treated me, I said replacing Margaret would not solve the structural problems in how the department functioned. I also did not want my first act as a leader to be interpreted as revenge. Victor looked at me for a long moment, then said the choice was unexpected and politically astute. I replied that I had learned a few things from standing on the sidelines for too long. Victor accepted both conditions. Margaret would stay, but the department's operational issues would now coordinate through my office. When he extended his hand, I shook it and felt a new chapter truly begin. Not because of the title. A title is only a sign. What mattered was that for the first time, I had the authority to change the things I had previously only watched hurt other people. The company-wide email went out late that morning, announcing my new position and expanded responsibilities. My inbox immediately filled with congratulations, questions, meeting requests, and a few messages that felt far too friendly from people who had rarely greeted me in the hallway before. Daniel stopped by my desk, looking a little embarrassed. He asked whether I was now his boss. I said technically yes, then asked whether that would be a problem. He shook his head quickly and said that honestly, I had always been the person who knew what was happening anyway. That sentence made me smile, but it also made me think, how many women have always been the person who knew what was happening without ever being given formal authority? How many people are called reliable instead of strategic, hardworking instead of leadership material, helpful instead of exceptional? Throughout the day, colleagues who had once treated me like part of the office furniture suddenly found reasons to introduce themselves. The administrative assistants, the people who had always been kind to me, smiled in a very different way. They understood. More than anyone, they knew invisible work was what kept an organization standing. And they knew that when one invisible person was finally called by her rightful name, many others gained hope too. Margaret avoided me for most of the day. Late in the afternoon, she appeared beside my desk with a folder. She said it was the quarterly strategy document, and since operational planning now fell under my scope, I would need to present it at the executive meeting the next day. Her voice was stiff, but the old denial was gone. I accepted the folder and said I would review it that evening. She turned to leave, then stopped. After a moment, she said she had not opposed my promotion because she thought I was incapable. She had done it because she could not afford to lose me from her team. It was probably the most honest thing she had ever said to me. I looked at her and answered that this was the fundamental problem. A good manager develops her people, even when that means letting them move on. Margaret gave one sharp nod and walked away. I did not know whether that conversation made us allies. Probably not. But it created a new boundary. I would no longer be an asset kept in the dark because someone else found it convenient. That evening, I stayed late, but not in the old way. I was not putting out fires for someone else. I was reorganizing my workspace for the new role, outlining the team structure, identifying necessary hires, and designing internal training programs. Victor stopped by on his way out and asked why I was not celebrating. I said I would celebrate that weekend. But right now I was planning. He asked what I was planning. I handed him a proposal I had quietly developed over 2 years, a system for identifying internal talent, building succession paths, and recognizing invisible work before the people doing it burned out. Victor flipped through the pages, then looked at me as if he finally understood what he had nearly lost. 3 months later, the transformation was already real. My new team included a brilliant systems analyst who had been buried in technology support and a process developer who had been miscast as an administrative assistant. Together, we streamlined operations across multiple departments, significantly reducing overtime while productivity metrics improved. What made me proudest was not the clean charts and executive meetings. It was that people were beginning to leave work on time without feeling guilty. Margaret and I built a professional working relationship. Not friendly. Exactly. But respectful. Once, she no longer had to pretend she understood operational details she had never fully grasped. She became stronger in client-facing work. Harrington Global expanded its contract into additional service lines and specifically requested my team's involvement. One evening, Victor texted me that the board had approved my promotion to vice president level effective the following month, with a unanimous vote. The strongest recommendation had come from Margaret. I set the phone down and felt satisfaction move slowly through my chest. The victory was not the corner office with my name on the door, though that was nice too. The victory was changing a system that had made me and many others invisible. The victory was creating a path for competent people to be recognized before they had to exhaust themselves, proving they deserved it. If you have ever felt that you were carrying more than you were credited for, remember this: your value does not disappear because others fail to see it. Do not wait for them to wake up on their own. Demonstrate your worth so clearly that denying it becomes impossible. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story helped you, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and keep believing that your silence does not mean you are not powerful.